I don't know what the final outcome is going to look like. I'm optimistic. I think there are a lot of reasons why it's closer than it has been at other times. One of them is we've got a unique alignment. A Republican facing a Democrat is one thing. A Republican facing a Democrat pretending to be an independent is quite another.
Tell us about the tone of this race. It's been very contentious, one of the most contentious we've seen in a while.
Sure. I'll tell you, my focus has been on my policies. I talk about my opponent far less than I talk about my policies. I can't say the same for my opponent.
Senator, what impact did President Trump's 2 endorsements of you have on this race?
Well, I think there are a lot of Utah voters who feel strongly about President Trump, including many who support him. I'm grateful for his endorsement, and for those Utah voters who care about his opinion, I think it's been very helpful.
Senator, what do you say to Utahns who didn't check your name on the ballot?
Well, what I say to them is if I'm reelected, I'm going to continue to fight for what I fought for, which is constitutionally limited government. The worst thing that can happen when we follow the Constitution more strictly, more carefully, more aggressively, is that we have less government. What we need right now is, in many instances, less government, less of a government that accumulates $31 trillion in debt, that took in over $4 trillion last year and spent nearly $7, producing record-breaking inflation. Nationally, inflation is at about 8.3%. That by itself is staggering. That amounts to roughly a month's worth of wages just wiped out because of excessive federal spending. In Utah, inflation is more severe than in other parts of the country. Nationally, if you measure inflation from the moment Joe Biden took office until today, it's 13.5%. In Utah, it's 16%. In Utah, the average Utah family is spending $949 a month every month just on their monthly household expenses, basic necessities. That's a problem.
Evan McMullin said you were in the pocket of special interests. Are you in the pocket of special interests?
It's news to me. It's news to every special interest I know anything about. Look, my voting record speaks for itself. My voting record is about me trying to make sure that we keep each level of government, state, local, federal, in its lane, and each function of government within the federal operation in Washington, within its branch. It's not a message that's popular with special interests.
Senator, your opponent said today that your re-election would bring this country in part down the path towards authoritarianism. What do you make of that?
That's more of a hyperbole that we've come to expect from that candidate. Defend his First Amendment right to say what he wants. Doesn't make it right. Doesn't make it responsible.
They're saying it's inflation. How do you plan to fight inflation if you make it another term in Washington?
Well, first of all, we've got to stop what we're doing that's causing the problem. Look, we've had massive runaway deficits for a long time. But these guys have taken it to a whole new level. These guys have made an art form out of it. These guys have expanded it beyond what I thought was physically possible to do, and we're experiencing the results. We brought in over $4 trillion last year, which is a record-breaking sum in revenue. More money than it cost to run the federal government just in my first term in office. They spent nearly $7, effectively printing nearly $3 trillion. That's what causes this. Milton Friedman explained during our last period of great inflation. Inflation in America has one cause, and it's excessive federal spending by Washington. So first thing we've got to do is stop that. The second thing we've got to do is bring about massive spending reform, budgetary and spending reform. What we've had is a situation in which a small handful of legislative leaders from the two parties will go behind closed doors and work for weeks or months writing a spending bill. Then conveniently they wait until the very last minute to bring forward a spending bill, which very often conveniently results in us spending hundreds of millions, if not trillions of dollars more than we have. That causes inflation. Now, it would make a big difference if we forced those leaders to bring those spending bills to the floor of the Senate and the House, allowing us to debate it, discuss it, and amend it with the input of the American people under light of day, rather than just reflexively spending bills. And that's what we're going to do. That'll be a first order of business. One of the first things I'm going to insist on, if in fact Republicans take the majority, before we do anything else, before we even have leadership elections, which normally follows a general election, I'm going to insist that we come together and agree on some basic principles, governing principles about how we're going to restrain spending. That's going to be top of the list.